Hi everyone, LJ Anderson here. Today I'm going to be doing a review of Nova of the Star Lore Legacy by Chuck Black. And to begin with, just a brief kind of idea of what this book is about. So it is, as you probably guessed by the cover and the title, we are talking about a sci-fi book. And if you know anything about Chuck Black, you probably will know that this is a retelling of a biblical account. And in this case, we're talking about Moses. So this is a sci-fi retelling of Moses, which I think is kind of basically the idea that he had for writing this book was probably something along the lines of, so what if Moses and the Exodus happened in the future on a distant planet that has nothing to do with Earth. Of course, one of the big downsides of a book like this, and it is the case here, is that it's kind of a spoiler to know that it's based on the life of Moses. Because if you know the biblical narrative of Moses, you will know that there are certain plot points that need to be hit, basically. And Chuck Black hits those plot points basically to a T. And so, in a sense, if you already know the biblical narrative, you already know a significant portion of the story. That said, this is definitely a sci-fi book, so it's it's a completely different world. It is there's interstellar travel, and faster than light speeds that these aircraft can go at by going through slipstream. It's your typical sci-fi book, and in this case it's one of the sci-fi books that has real science mixed with not real science. Some books try to be very, very realistic of this is actually how this might go down. Chuck Black sort of does that. He is trying to make it realistic, and yet there are things that he has added into it that are very much not realistic, but they are important parts of his plot, and so we have to deal with them. If you don't like fake science in science fiction, you're gonna have a problem here. So even though it's the story of Moses, and I know that story quite well, I still enjoyed this book. And I mean, I read it in less than 24 hours, like the actual time frame. I started it in the evening one night, and that next day I finished it. So it was good enough for me to want to just kind of go through it pretty quickly. And it's relatively short, fairly quick read, but it's definitely not for the same audience as Chuck Black's other his fantasy series. Not his other fantasy, because this is sci-fi, but it's very much it very much feels like it's meant for an older group, probably still YA, young adult. Not like there's no mature themes or anything like that, but it's definitely, he doesn't really pull any punches with large words. He has to do a lot of info dumps because he's creating this massive, basically an entire universe, but he only has, I want to say, like 250 pages to do that. And so in order for us to understand, the universe, he's got to give us a lot of information pretty quick. And that can be a little bit difficult to get into. I mean, I'm sure people who read sci-fi more don't have as much of a problem, because the concepts are pretty similar in my understanding. But most of my sci-fi reading that I have done has been in the Halo franchise, which I had already played a lot of the games, and so I was well aware of a lot of the lore and stuff, and the lingo, I guess. And so when I read the books, I was already I was invested in that world, and I already had a fair amount of knowledge about that world, and so I was able to catch on pretty quick. This book felt harder to get into in that sense. Like I had to put more effort in to understand the world well. And I think maybe this book, the first one in particular, I'm sure it's not going to be the case with the rest of the series, but I think the first one could have used more, like it could have been a longer book, that would allow more of an ease in. But of course, if that's not the story that Black was trying to tell, then we have what we have. And like I said, I read it quickly. I enjoyed it. I will be, like, the next book I'm reading is number 2 in this series, partially because I have not read this series at all. This is a first go through, but I enjoyed it enough that I want to continue the series. So, take that as you will. So, we already know that there's some level of spoilers due to it being based on the life of Moses. And I do say that it goes fairly similar to that, the biblical story. So, there's that. But to go a little bit deeper into spoilers without giving too much away, one of the things that I would like to say about this book is it does a better job of sticking to the narrative of Exodus than, if you've seen The Prince of Egypt, there are, it's a great movie, but there are a lot of aspects to it that are just like, that's not biblical, but I get what you're doing, because it doesn't make a great movie if you don't have, the fact that Moses in the movie doesn't know that he's Hebrew, whereas in the Bible, he knows it the whole time. That's the similar case here, but what it does get right is that Moses is not the brother of Pharaoh or the son of Pharaoh, but he is, a cousin to that, to the ruling line, which is something that Prince of Egypt doesn't get right. And so it, raises Ramses and Moses together as brothers. The movie, the Prince of Egypt does. Whereas Chuck Black rightly says, well, no, there's a friendship here which may not have been possible in biblical times, but there's a friendship here, but it's different. It's, not a brother thing, it's a cousin thing. So I do like that it is more true to the biblical narrative, but at the same time, that just exasperates the problem of it being spoilery. But I still really enjoyed it. So, But the next thing that I dislike about it, and it's a little different than the previous series, so Chuck Black's Kingdom series, his fantasy series, is one of my big critiques of it is that it doesn't have any magic at all. And that's a problem for the power of God. In both of these series, God is well, I don't know yet on this one. I think it's going to go this route. but God is essentially powerless in the sense that he can't do anything supernatural. But I'm actually super curious to see how this goes, because this is the story of Moses. So many of the miracles, the really big miracles that we talk about in the Bible, happen in this narrative. And I'm really curious to see if he adds a magic part to this, or if it's all going to be like his previous series, which involved no magic, which just causes all kinds of problems when we're talking about a supernatural, all-powerful God. So we'll see. We'll see if he only tries to make this work from a natural standpoint. And I said that this might be different for this book. One, because I have not gotten to the points where we would really expect a supernatural aspect. But there's also a difference in how this one is run, in that, like, this is a sci-fi book, like I said, but it has elements that are not science, at least, as we know it. And so what we get is, there's elements to this story that are magical in the sense that it's outside of what is possible with the laws of physics or what we would expect to ever see. But it's still presented as being something that is within the laws of physics in this universe. So I don't think that we can really make that argument here. I think he's definitely trying to go the route of saying there is no magic. But again, we'll have to see. If you've read the series, then but I will discover in the next books whether or not there is any magic at all. And if there's not, I'm going to not be very happy about that. But it is what it is. He is the author. He has decided that that is what he is going to do. I just recognize that no magic in a book about God is a significant problem. That's all I'll say on that, because I've talked about that on every single book that has come out by Chuck Black. And yeah, so the last thing that I want to talk about as a dislike for this book is that its ending was less than, trying to find the right word, not sure enjoyable is the right term, but there was something about it, and I think it was that it still felt like we were building up to the climax, and then we never got there. So it was, I don't want to spoil anything, but it was a build up. There's of course a battle, but it felt like the battle wasn't the climax. We were, still going on, building up, and then it ended. And I don't mind that, considering that I finished the book today and I'm gonna start reading the next book tomorrow. But had I started reading this series when it was first released, I think I would have been very unhappy with that ending. As it is, there are 6 books in this series out. I don't know if he has more on the way, but I don't have to worry about that. I can just get the next book. I have the next book, but I can just read it, and if you get the first one and read it and you liked it but you're disappointed by the ending, there's the next book and you can just move right on to that. I don't know if we're gonna see a climax early on in the next book, or if this was just a weird ending. I don't know. I do know that it was not my favorite. That said, I think personally I would give this a 4 out of 5 stars. the lack of magic is a problem for me. Like I said, we don't really know if that's going to be a thing further or later on in the series, but at least in this book, there seems to be no magic, and that there are just a few things with the storyline that are problematic. But I still really enjoyed it, and even a 4-star review, that's mostly due to the theological issue. I find that I'm not overly critical. Like, I don't really know. In previous books from Chuck Black, I have read reviews that say, this book tells instead of shows, and you should be showing more often in a book when you're writing it. But for me, I never had that issue with those books, and I still enjoy them to this day, even though the writers of those reviews probably knew what they're talking about, in that it's telling instead of showing. But I don't have an issue with that, and I don't know if that's just like I'm not a English major. I'm a theology major. I have 1 degree in theology, and I am going for another degree in theology. So maybe that's just a different emphasis on my part, because I'm definitely fairly critical of the theology in books. I think we should be careful with what we are espousing when we write books. If you're a writer, be very careful with what you're saying, and try to think through like where the theology that you are putting in your book eventually leads. In the case of no magic, it leads to a powerless God, and that's not the God of the Bible, and we should not be teaching that. It's just something we got to be aware of. And it's not something that I will ever say don't read these books for, but just be aware that there's no magic, and that causes problems. So that's all I have on this. If you want to read my book, Theology and Apologetics, it's back here. It's a book that examines the point of intersection between theology and apologetics, and it is a kind of a mixture of an introduction to both those areas, and also provides original research on the topic, and it, I think, is a refreshing new look into how these topics work together, and they should be viewed more complementary than they are. So if you'd like to read that, I will leave a link below, maybe 2 links to different areas where you could buy it. And thanks for watching. Until next time, God bless.